In the medieval monastery, a plant was rarely just a plant, it was a symbol, a living metaphor whispered by the Creator himself. Hidden from most eyes was a place known only to a few. The still room here, healing waters were born. Bethany, known as the master of all herbs, was believed to cure everything from headaches to snakebite. A hush would fall over the cloister, and the plants, having stretched toward the sun all day, curled gently inward to drink the dew. Sometimes, a lone monk unable to sleep would walk the stone paths in silence, his steps muffled by moss. He would not gather nor touch, but might pause beside the valerian, or lean toward the angelica, offering a silent prayer in the moonlight. The leaves turned silver in the pale glow, and for a moment the garden seemed like a page from a book too sacred to ever write down. It was a living psalm, a quiet testament. No one else saw it but the stars, and that was enough. Customary, sometimes called Bible leaf, was tucked between pages of scripture, not just as a bookmark, but for its calming scent. Hyssop, the ancient herb of purification, was used in both medicine and blessing rites, while celandine, bright and star-shaped, was applied to eye ailments. Even weeds were studied, respected. What others plucked and cast aside, the monks examined with patience, trusting that every leaf had purpose, even if its power remained a mystery. They didn't always need to understand how something worked, only that it did, and that it was part of creation. Copper alembics glowed faintly in the candlelight, distilling the very essence of herbs into oils, tonics, and tinctures, into folk remedies passed down in country kitchens, into the quiet foundation of modern medicine. The belief that care requires time, that healing begins in stillness, and that quiet itself can be a form of strength, those ideas endure. And in some monastery gardens, those plants still grow. The layout remains the same. The air still smells of lemon balm and thyme, and if you listen closely, you may still hear a low chant drifting through the cloisters, carried by the wind, singing softly among the leaves. Steam rose in thin curls, scented with rosemary, elderflower, or mint, drifting through the air like incense. A monk in a linen apron, hands stained green from the previous day's harvest, moved slowly between vessels, stirring, waiting, recording his observations in the margins of ancient herbals. There was no haste in this room, only the slow drip of condensed steam, the quiet bubbling of heated water, and the hum of intentional silence. The remedies crafted here could ease coughs, soothe wounds, or calm a laboring mother's breath, but they were made not just with knowledge, but with faith, prayer, and song. Rosemary, with its sharp, clear scent, was not only used in healing, but in mourning. It stood for remembrance, not just of the body, but of the soul, and was often laid at funerals or burned during prayers for the departed. Lily of the Valley, delicate and white, was known as Our Lady's Tears, believed to have sprung from the sorrow of the Virgin Mary at the foot of the cross. Rue, bitter and cleansing, was seen as both a physical and spiritual purifier, often planted near doorways to ward off illness or evil. Then there was mandrake, with its eerie, human-shaped root used sparingly and always reverently. Some monks refused to touch it directly, fearing the power it might contain. They would dig it up at dusk, reciting psalms softly as their fingers sifted the dark soil. In this world, everything held meaning. Everything was sacred. To tend the garden was not a chore, it was an act of devotion. Tucked behind the monastery's stone walls, sometimes the most powerful medicine was not plant or potion, but sound. When illness visited a monk, his brothers might gather in the chapel and hold a vigil, chanting through the night with voices that rose and fell like waves on a shore. These chants, soft, slow, often wordless, or sung in Latin, were not designed to stir the heart, but to still it. Asterisk, Kyrie, eleison, Christ, eleison. Asterisk, Thord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. The repetition brought rhythm to breath, and rhythm to breath was seen as harmony within the body. Some believed the human voice could restore what illness had disordered, not by magic, but through peace. Whether the chanting healed the body or merely eased the soul, its value was never questioned. Many of the plants, once common in these sacred gardens, have since faded into obscurity, but then they were vital. At night, the garden rested. Though centuries have passed, the knowledge cultivated in these monastic gardens has not disappeared. It carried forward into the hands of apothecaries. Close your eyes and imagine stepping through a time-worn wooden archway, its surface smoothed by generations of quiet, reverent hands. Caring for this garden could seem the most humble, but for some, it was sacred work. These monk healers, often known as infirmarers, were caretakers of the sick, both brothers and pilgrims alike. Deliberate chants that were not meant to entertain, but to heal. With drying racks strung from wooden beams, bundles of thyme, yarrow, hyssop, and rose hips hung in orderly rows, filling the space with the earthy scent of dried herbs and beeswax. Glass jars lined the shelves, each carefully labeled and filled with salves, powders, tinctures, or syrups. This is where the infirmarer worked, mixing remedies with steady hands and whispered prayers. In one corner stood a simple crucifix, a reminder that their healing was a service, not a power. They did not claim to cure, but to steward the process, trusting that healing belonged to God. Gregorian chant, with its flowing rhythm and solemn tones. When a sick brother was brought to the infirmary, he was laid on a straw mattress, wrapped in a woolen blanket, a cool cloth placed gently on his brow, a sachet of herbs, lavender for calm, rosemary for clarity, might be slipped beneath his pillow. The infirmarer would murmur a psalm or a chant, invoking divine presence. Wounds were washed with honey or wine, fevers coaxed away with teas of willow bark or linden flower. Every motion was unhurried, every word was soft. Some believed the moon's phases affected the body's balance, and so treatments were timed to the lunar calendar. In this world, there were no ticking clocks, only the rhythm of breath, the stirring of leaves in the window, and the slow, sacred passage of time was believed to calm the soul and even affect the body's internal humors. The chanting, rising with each breath, often became part of the work itself. Some monks even sang to the plants, believing that divine harmony could influence their growth. It wasn't mere poetry, it was spiritual ecology, a recognition of connection between voice, plant, and purpose. They studied ancient medical texts handed down from Hippocrates, Galen, and Dioscorides, but they also learned through direct, careful observation of their world. They knew when to gather wormwood, how to dry lavender just so, which roots could ease childbirth, which leaves would lower fever. To them, the garden was not just soil, and stems, it was a living library, each plant a page in a book authored by creation. Beyond it lies a garden, not one bursting with roses or showy color, but a space carefully planted with herbs, each selected for its purpose. Symmetrical beds no wider than a monk's outstretched arms, so that he might tend the plants without stepping on sacred ground. Stone borders gave form to the space, while small wooden signs inscribed in Latin labeled each plant: Salvia officinalis, Melissa digitalis, Urtica. The scent was a quiet chorus of peppermint, sage, lemon balm, and fennel. Some monks grouped the plants by their medical function: wound healers in one corner, digestive aids in another, while others arranged them according to celestial beliefs, aligning herbs with the stars. In the garden's center often stood a well or fountain, a symbol of purity, a reminder that water, like prayer, is essential for life. There's a soft hush in the air, a kind of silence that feels alive, wrapping around you like morning mist. The stones beneath your feet are still wet with dew. Somewhere nearby, a low chant drifts between rows of mint and rue, weaving itself into the air. This is no ordinary garden. This is a physic garden, a living apothecary, tended by monks, not merely gardeners, within the cloistered walls of a medieval monastery. Here, plants are not just green things. They are medicine. They are mystery. They are believed to be fragments of divine wisdom made visible, fragrant, and alive. Among the many roles a medieval monk might take on, in the soft light of early morning, the garden revealed its structure, neat. But what truly transformed these gardens into places of sacred ritual was sound. As monks worked among the herbs, many sang soft. Inside the monastery, near the garden, was the herbarium, a small, stone-walled room, cool and quiet. The rituals of care were quiet and deeply intentional. As Hildegard's visions and writings spread beyond the monastery walls, so too does her reputation. The monks at Disibodenberg are reluctant to let her go, not just because of her spiritual gifts, but because her presence brings prestige and wealth, hundreds of them. But in her 60s and 70s, she begins to travel the Rhineland as a preacher, a role nearly unheard of for a woman of her time. She composes. Her mind remains alight with vision. In the small stone cell she built with her own will, she lies one evening listening to the wind as it moves through the cloister gardens. The rhythm of Hildegard's life, so extraordinary, so filled with sacred defiance and luminous purpose, begins at last to slow, and when the end comes, it is quiet, like a candle extinguished after a long, radiant vigil. To fishermen and farmers, noble women and priests, she does not thunder or condemn. People gather in silence, drawn to something they do not fully understand, but deeply feel. She writes to popes, emperors, bishops, abbesses, barons, even to Frederick Barbarossa himself. There, nestled on a forested hillside, it becomes a sanctuary for noble women who choose the cloistered life not out of necessity, but devotion. Drawn to Hildegard's wisdom, her music, and the stillness she carries, they study under her. She teaches them about the stars, about the sacred rhythms of the body. Slowly pacing the gardens, she brushes her hands across the tops of rosemary and sage, her voice rising in soft melodies, her presence as steady as the earth itself. Her voice in ink is steady and fearless. In her 80s, she allows the burial of a young man in her convent cemetery, a man who died under excommunication, but whom Hildegard believes had repented. The local bishop is enraged and demands the body be removed. She refuses. As punishment, the bishop places the entire convent under interdict, forbidding mass and sacred music. For Hildegard, who sees music as divine medicine, the blow is crushing. She writes a letter, calm, yet impassioned, arguing that to silence music is to silence God's harmony, that mercy, not rigidity, reflects the divine. Her words, as they so often do, prevail. The interdict is lifted. The music returns. She urges rulers to uphold justice, to resist pride, to remember the forgotten. To the emperor, a warning. Asterisk, the sword you wield will weigh heavy, unless lifted in truth. Her letters are not only read, they are answered. Men who rule empires stop to respond to the voice of a Benedictine nun. The conflict grows tense, and Hildegard falls ill. Her body weakens, her voice fades. Only when permission is finally granted does her strength return, and she leads a small group of nuns down the Rhine, through green valleys and along winding rivers to the rocky hill that will become their new home. Music, healing, and quiet power. The air is thick with the scent of pine, lavender, and wild thyme, and the sound of birdsong dances between stone walls. She does not name the place after herself. She calls it simply Rupertsberg. Word travels through abbeys and courts of a nun whose voice seems to echo the stars, whose writings burn with divine fire, and whose mind sees what even the most learned monks cannot. But recognition comes with resistance. Some church authorities grow uneasy, questioning the legitimacy of her visions, skeptical of her bold theological ideas. Around the year 1150, she receives what she describes as another divine command, this time to leave the monastery at Dissebodenberg and establish a new convent on the Rupertsberg near the town of Bingen. It is a radical act. Women in her world do not found monasteries. But Hildegard, now in her early 50s, has never been one to obey the limitations set by her gender. The journey to Rupertsberg is far from smooth. From this peaceful stronghold, Hildegard begins to write not just visions or music, but letters. Most women of Hildegard's age would fade into seclusion, but not all is peaceful in Hildegard's final years. As the year 1179 dawns, Hildegard nears 81. Close your eyes and picture the rolling hills of the Rhineland, cloaked in mist beneath a quiet medieval sky. It is the year 1098, and the air carries the scent of damp earth, fresh-cut hay, the 10th child in her family. She is quiet, pale, drawn more to stillness than to play. But within her silence, something stirs. Her visions become illustrations, wheels of light, cosmic diagrams, towers of virtue surrounded by angels. Hildegard of Bingen becomes a composer, a physician, a prophetess, a philosopher, and a spiritual advisor to kings and popes. She was born in silence, and yet she speaks across time with a voice that still echoes, through visions, song, and the green wisdom of the earth. She lit a candle in the dark and dared the world to see. But Sevilla's isn't just theology, is a deeply intimate vision of how heaven, earth, body, and spirit are woven together. She speaks of Viridatus, the greening force of life, a divine vitality that pulses through every living thing from soil to soul. The patterns in the clouds. Alone in her quiet monastery, she begins to write music unlike anything the church has known. Her compositions rise and fall in strange, lyrical patterns, soaring hymns filled with longing, joy, and radiant awe. She names her collection Symphonia, Harmony, Celestium, Revelationum, *, Symphony of the Harmony of Heavenly Revelations, *. Each piece is a kind of living prayer, rising like incense into the still air. Her music becomes her voice, echoing far beyond the cloister walls. Even today, centuries later, choirs still sing her melodies, haunting and celestial, as if sung through time itself. The way seasons seem to hum with a language she almost understands. She becomes a healer, deeply attuned to the natural world. She begins to study herbs, stones, and animals, not just for their physical properties, but for their spiritual resonance. She believes every created thing carries a divine signature, a purpose written into its form. She writes 2 major works on natural medicine: Physica, a catalogue of healing plants and remedies, and Causae et Curae, a detailed guide to the causes and treatments of illness. Her medicine is rooted in harmony. Too much heat or too little moisture, too much tension in the soul or imbalance in the gut. She prescribes fennel for digestion, chamomile for fever, lavender for calming the heart. Hers is not science as we know it, but intuition sharpened by reverence for creation. She tells no one, not yet. In this time, visions could be seen as divine or dangerously heretically. Hildegard isn't ready to be seen, and the sharp sweetness of flowering herbs, her parents, believing it a holy and noble path, place her under the care of Jutta of Sponheim, a deeply devout woman living as an anchorite, sealed in a stone cell attached to the monastery of Here, the world narrows to prayer, fasting, silence, and long hours of study. The cell is cold, the routine unrelenting. And yet, as the years pass, Hildegard finds companionship in the silence, and the visions grow more vivid. She sees celestial towers and wheels of fire, angelic figures with eyes like polished metal. Sometimes they frighten her, sometimes they comfort her, but always they return. This is not the world of modern certainty, but a half-dreaming age where faith and superstition intertwine, where people believe stars sing and angels whisper in visions. It is here, in the small village of Bermersheim, that a child is born into a noble family. Her name is Hildegard. From the moment she draws breath, there is a sense that she is different. Her birth brings not just joy, but mystery. Even as a child, Hildegard speaks little. At just 8 years old, Hildegard is given to the church. By her teenage years, Hildegard has become known within the monastic community, not just for her intelligence and humility, but for a quiet, magnetic insight that seems to deepen with time. When Jutta dies, it is Hildegard whom the other nuns choose as their new leader. As magistra, she teaches scripture, guides prayer, and gently begins to write hat first in faltering Latin, her grammar imperfect, her structure unconventional. But her words blaze with clarity, and her conviction begins to outweigh her fear. She starts recording her visions, not as dreams or symbols, but as divine revelations meant to be shared. At 43, Hildegard receives what she describes as a direct command from God. She must write down everything she has seen, but Hildegard is more than a seer. She is also a composer. And still, Hildegard's gifts stretch further. In an age when women's voices were rarely heard, after the morning meal, bare bread and silence, you do not linger. There is no idle sipping of tea, no casual stretch by a hearth. Sext, the 6th hour. Fatigue, brushing your shoulders like a cloak. But you do not resist. You know the rhythm. You are the rhythm. And after none, there is a fragile space-time for stillness, not rest. Some monks retreat to their cells, sitting in quiet contemplation, their lips moving silently over scripture. Others walk the cloister garden-worn sandals, gliding softly over stone between rows of sage and lavender, their minds struggling to empty, to remain untouched by thought. You return to the chapel with the same quiet surrender. Vespers, the hour of dusk. You gather once more in the chapel, as you have countless times before. How much of yourself do you give up before the silence becomes all you are? And tomorrow, will it be the same? Or will something break the rhythm? Asterisk, asterisk, the stained glass now glows with twilight blue-red, gold diffused in fading light. The psalms take on a more tender tone, echoing the sorrow of parting day. The rhythm continues, bowing, chanting, silence. You've long forgotten what it feels like to check a clock. Candlelight and sky are enough, no resistance. Then, just as the last word is spoken, the great silence descends. Shadows stretch across the stone floor like arms reaching for rest. You chant the last psalms, asking for peace in the night, for mercy, for protection against the darkness within and without. Then, one by one, the candles are snuffed. You bow, you leave. From now until morning, no voice will be heard, not in the halls, not in the cells, not even in whispered prayer. It is a silence thick as wool, sacred and absolute. No choice. You chant. Your hands are cracked, your voice soft, your spirit disciplined into stillness. Outside, the garden breathes under moonlight. A single owl calls. You close your eyes, not with dread, but with resignation. You will sleep now. You breathe. You bow. The psalms rise like incense, blurring time and thought. Then comes the day's main meal, modest, but compared to breakfast, it feels almost generous. Lentils, cabbage, perhaps bread softened in broth. Meat is rare, reserved for the frail or aged. Still, the warmth of cooked food and the steady cadence of scripture read aloud bring a strange comfort, an island of gentleness in the sea of discipline. You eat without speaking, eyes low, your spirit quieted by the simplicity of it all. You rise as one with your brothers and file silently from the refectory, returning to the rhythm that governs your life. The day's labor awaits. Perhaps you're back at your desk, ink drying on your fingertips, or in the barn, feeding animals with calloused hands. Maybe you're by the cloister laundry, scrubbing habits in freezing water, fingers raw and red. Each season shapes the work. Winter slows the soil and fills your hours with mending and candle making. Spring brings the fevered rhythm of planting. The monastery exists within two calendars, liturgical and natural land. Both move you like currents you cannot escape. And though it varies, it is never optional. You might find yourself in the garden, the earth damp and cold against your fingers as you kneel among rows of leeks and onions. The chill bites at your knuckles, but you welcome it. Discomfort is a familiar companion. Or perhaps you're sent to the scriptorium, where the air smells faintly of ink and wax, and candlelight pools on wooden desks worn smooth by years of sacred transcription. You bend over parchment, quill in hand, copying lines of holy text in a cramped Latin that demands absolute focus. Every mark must be deliberate, every breath controlled. Elsewhere, another monk stirs thick stew in the kitchen, hauls water from the well, or scrubs soot from iron pots. No task is trivial. To labor is to serve, and to serve is to silence the self. Idleness is the enemy of the soul. Saint Benedict rotand here. Idleness has no place. By midday, the bell calls you once again. Afternoon brings a return to labor. What The morning did not finish. The afternoon must. As the sun begins its slow descent, the bell rings for none. The 9th hour. You pray again. Your limbs are heavy now. The bell rings again. Supper follows another bowl of soup, more bread, a monk reading aloud as you eat in silence. You return to the chapel for Compline, the final prayer of the day. The light is nearly gone. Candles flicker and sputter. Back in your cell, the straw mattress welcomes you with rough familiarity. Your body aches in quiet places, but only for a few hours, because the bell will toll again. And you begin to wonder, asterisk, how long can a soul live like this? You wake in darkness, not the kind that holds mystery or warmth, but the cold, breathless dark of a monastery cellstone, walls pressing close, the air sharp with chill. The first sound isn't birdsong or the rustle of dawn, but a slow, solemn bell. Its toll not an alarm, but a summons. 2 o'clock in the morning. Your body is heavy with sleep not yet lived. Your limbs stiff from the cold seeping up through the straw mattress beneath you. There is no fire, no comfort, just the ancient silence of discipline. You rise without a word, no greetings, no questions. Speech is forbidden outside the appointed times. It breaks the rhythm, disturbs the divine order. Robes itch as you dress in the dark. Sandals slip on with a soft creak of leather. In the corridor, shadows move with you hooded figures in silence. A procession of the faithful answering the same bell. The chapel looms ahead, candlelit and echoing. You take your place for matins, the first prayer of the day, and the chant begins. Latin psalms rise and fall like breath. No instruments, no melody, but the one shaped by centuries. Time seems to vanish. Silence and the cold stone underfoot remain. When matins ends, you return to your cell. Still no sun, no warmth, no breakfast, just silence. A short sleep awaits, if you can call it that, a half-aware drifting where the body rests. But the soul stays alert, listening for the next bell. It comes at dawn lauds, the prayer of light. You're already awake before it tolls, the rhythm etched into your bones like scripture. Mist coils outside as you walk to the chapel again. The same path, the same chants, and yet something feels new. It always does. In the refectory, a simple meal is served: black bread, a sliver of cheese, if it's a feast day, water in a wooden cup. Still no words, just the sound of one monk reading aloud from the gospel, as the rest sit in stillness. There is no choice in this life, no luxury, but neither is there chaos. There is only the rule, the rhythm, the silence. And as you chew that rough bread in a room full of men who do not look at you, you begin to wonder. What comes next? What happens after the prayers, the hunger, the stillness? Where does devotion end, and does it ever? Good evening, and welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, we'll be drifting into the cloistered, echoing halls of a medieval monastery, a place where silence was golden and discomfort was considered divine. Imagine a stone corridor, cool to the touch, with high arched ceilings that swallow your footsteps in stillness. The smell of beeswax candles, the dry scent of ancient parchment, and the muffled rustle of robes in prayer. This is not a place of ease or indulgence, but of quiet discipline and repetition, of timeless rituals and unwavering routine. A woman cloistered by walls, yet freed by vision, cloaked in holy poverty, but seated atop quiet power. Tonight, we'll walk through the daily life of a monk, but for the songs whispered to them, then wander gently into the life of Hildegard of Bingen. We'll explore the monastery's garden, not just for its herbs. And finally, we'll glimpse into the lives of those who led monasteries. So, lay back, behind the thick stone walls of a 12th century abbey. Let your breath grow slower and picture yourself where time ticks not with a clock, but with prayer. Let us begin with what it was really like to live as a medieval monk, not for an hour, not for a week, but every day for a lifetime.